The dust cloud rising from the east drew every eye in Superior, Arizona. But none watched more intently than Delilah Sanders, as she stood on the weathered porch of her father's general store in the scorching August heat of 1883. She knew that rider before his face became clear, knew the way he sat in the saddle with his shoulders squared but his head slightly tilted, knew the particular rhythm of his horse's gait that kicked up those distinctive patterns in the red Arizona dirt. Her heart began hammering against her ribs so hard she pressed a hand to her chest, willing herself to breathe normally even as 5 years of carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble at the mere sight of him approaching. Benjamin Irving had left without a word one morning in June of 1878, when Delilah was 18 and he was 20, and she had spent countless nights wondering if he was alive or dead, if he had forgotten her completely, or if he ever thought about the girl he had kissed beneath the cottonwood trees by the creek. She had been young then, fresh-faced and full of dreams about marrying the rancher's son who made her laugh and treated her like she was precious. But he had vanished like morning mist, and she had been forced to harden herself, to become the woman who helped run her father's store and kept her heart locked away where it could not be broken again. Now she was 23, and Benjamin was riding back into her life as if 5 years was nothing more than a brief absence. Delilah watched as he drew closer, taking in the changes time had wrought. He was broader in the shoulders now, his face more weathered and serious, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of hardship and sun. He wore better clothes than when he had left, she noticed, a quality leather vest over a clean shirt, and his horse was a fine chestnut mare that must have cost a considerable sum. But it was his eyes she searched for as he finally reached the main street of Superior and slowed his horse to a walk, those deep brown eyes that had once looked at her like she hung the moon. He spotted her standing there, and she saw him stiffen in the saddle, saw something flash across his face that might have been fear or hope, or both tangled together. He guided his horse directly toward the store, and Delilah forced herself to remain still, to not flee inside or rush down to meet him. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing how thoroughly he had devastated her when he left. Benjamin dismounted with practiced ease and looped his reins around the hitching post. He stood there for a moment, looking up at her with an expression she could not quite read, and then he removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture that seemed almost penitent. "Delilah," he said, and his voice was deeper than she remembered, rougher around the edges. "I know I have no right to stand here and speak to you." "You have that much correct," she replied, pleased that her voice came out steady and cool. Inside, she was a tempest of emotions, but she would not let him see that. 5 years, Benjamin, 5 years without a single word. I know. He took a step closer to the porch, and she could see the dust coating his clothes, the weariness in his face that spoke of hard riding. "I wrote letters. Dozens of them. I just never sent them because the words never seemed adequate for what I needed to say. So you said nothing instead." Delilah crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive gesture she could not help. "That was your choice then. To let me wonder and worry and eventually assume you were dead, or had simply decided I was not worth the effort of goodbye." Benjamin flinched as if she had struck him, and she felt a small, bitter satisfaction at causing him even a fraction of the pain she had endured. But then his face hardened with determination, and he climbed the steps of the porch, stopping a respectful distance away, but close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I left because I was not worthy of you," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of conviction that made her breath catch. "I was a rancher's son with nothing to my name but a broken-down horse and empty pockets." Your father made it clear he would never consent to our marriage unless I could provide for you properly, and he was right to say so. You deserved better than a life of scraping by, hoping the cattle did not die and the rains came in time to save the grass. My father said that to you." Delilah felt something crack inside her chest, a mixture of anger and grief at this revelation. Her father had never mentioned any such conversation. "The night before I left, I asked him for permission to court you properly, with intention to marry. He told me I was a fool to think he would give his daughter to a man with no prospects, no land of his own, nothing but dreams and ambition." Benjamin's jaw tightened. He was not cruel about it. He was honest, and I could not fault him for wanting more for you than I could offer. Delilah felt tears pricking at her eyes but refused to let them fall. "So you simply left without explaining. You did not think I deserved to know why, to have a choice in the matter." "I was young and proud and hurt," Benjamin admitted. "I thought if I told you, you would try to convince me to stay, and I would not have the strength to leave. And I had to leave, Delilah. I had to become someone worthy of your love first." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and 5 years of absence. Delilah stared at him, trying to reconcile this serious, determined man with the boy she had loved, the one who had stolen kisses and made promises beneath the stars. She wanted to rage at him, to send him away and tell him it was too late, that he had forfeited his chance when he rode away without explanation. But another part of her, the part she had tried so hard to bury, wanted to ask him where he had been, what he had done, whether he had thought of her even half as much as she had thought of him. "What gives you the right to decide what I deserve?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What gave you the right to make that choice for both of us?" "Nothing," Benjamin said simply. "I had no right at all. I was wrong to leave the way I did, wrong to let you suffer in uncertainty. I have carried that guilt every single day for 5 years, and if you tell me to leave now and never come back, I will understand. But I had to return. I had to at least try to explain, to ask if there might be a chance you could forgive me." Before Delilah could respond, the door of the store opened and her father emerged, his weathered face settling into hard lines as he recognized Benjamin standing on his porch. "Benjamin Irving," Harold Sanders said, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "I wondered if you would have the nerve to show your face here again after the way you disappeared." "Mr. Sanders," Benjamin said, turning to face the older man with a respectful nod. "I know my departure was poorly handled. I have come back to make amends if such a thing is possible." Harold's eyes narrowed. "You broke my daughter's heart, boy. She spent months watching the Eastern Road, waiting for you to come back or at least send word. Do you know what it did to her, watching her waste away, losing that light she used to carry?" "Papa," Delilah said sharply, embarrassment flooding through her at having her pain laid bare so plainly. "No, he needs to hear this," Harold continued, stepping forward with the protective anger only a father could muster. "She eventually stopped waiting. She built herself back up, made herself strong again, learned to live without you. Now you ride back in here like nothing happened, like you have any right to speak to her." "I have no rights here," Benjamin said, his voice steady despite the anger radiating from Harold. "But I am not the same man who left. I spent 5 years working myself to the bone, saving every penny, building something I could be proud of. I now own a cattle ranch in New Mexico territory, 3,000 acres with good water and better grazing. I have a house built, a profitable business, and money in the bank. I came back because I wanted Delilah to know that I did not leave because I did not love her. I left because I loved her too much to ask her to settle for a life of poverty and struggle." Harold stared at him for a long moment, and Delilah could see the war playing out on her father's face between his protective instincts and his practical nature. A rancher with 3,000 acres was not a small achievement, particularly for a man only 25 years old. "That may be so," Harold said finally, "but success does not erase the pain you caused. My daughter's forgiveness is not something you can buy with land and cattle." "I know that, sir. I am not here to buy anything. I am here to tell the truth and hope it might be enough." Benjamin turned back to Delilah, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "I never stopped thinking about you. Every fence I built, every head of cattle I bought, every dawn I watched break over the mountains, I thought about you. I asked myself if I was working hard enough, if I was building something worthy of the woman I loved. And when I finally looked at what I had accomplished and knew I could offer you a good life, I rode straight here. I did not even stop at my family's ranch first. You were my first thought when I left, and you have been my first thought every day since." The sincerity in his voice shook something loose inside Delilah, some of that carefully constructed armor she had built around her heart. But she could not simply forgive 5 years of silence, 5 years of hurt, no matter how pretty his words were now. "I need time," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You cannot ride in here after 5 years and expect me to simply accept your explanation and fall into your arms. I am not the same girl you left behind, Benjamin. I have changed, just as you have." "I understand," Benjamin said, and she could see the disappointment in his eyes even as he nodded. "May I at least stay in town for a while, give you time to think, to talk to me when you are ready?" "I have nowhere else I need to be. The ranch can manage without me for as long as necessary." Delilah looked to her father, who was watching their exchange with a complicated expression. Finally, Harold sighed heavily. "There is a boarding house 2 streets over," he said gruffly. "Mrs. Patterson runs a clean establishment. You can stay there, but I warn you, Benjamin Irving, if you hurt my daughter again, successful rancher or not, you will answer to me." "Understood, sir," Benjamin said, and there was a flicker of hope in his expression that made Delilah's treacherous heart beat faster. She watched as he descended the porch steps, mounted his horse, and rode toward the boarding house, her mind swirling with confusion and old feelings she thought she had buried. When he was out of sight, she turned to her father with accusatory eyes. "You never told me he asked to court me properly," she said. "You never mentioned that conversation." Harold had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I did not think it mattered. He left anyway, did he not? Whether I had discouraged him or not, he made his choice." "But it does matter," Delilah insisted. "It changes everything. All this time I thought he just abandoned me without reason. Now I find out you essentially told him he was not good enough." "I told him the truth," Harold said defensively. "He had nothing to offer you, Delilah. Was I wrong to want better for my only daughter than a life of hardship?" Delilah felt tears finally spill over, frustration and confusion and old grief all mixing together. "You should have let me make that choice. I loved him, Papa. I would have chosen him even with nothing, and instead I have spent 5 years thinking he did not care enough to even say goodbye." Harold's face softened, and he pulled his daughter into a rare embrace. "I am sorry, sweetheart. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if he truly loved you, he would fight for you regardless of what I said. When he left instead, I believed I had been right about his character. But he did fight for me," Delilah said into her father's shoulder, "just not in the way you expected. He fought by making himself into someone you could not refuse." "Perhaps," Harold conceded, "but that remains to be seen. Words are easy, Delilah. We shall see if his actions match his pretty speeches." Over the next several days, Benjamin proved himself remarkably patient. He did not push himself on Delilah, did not demand her attention or force confrontations. Instead, he quietly integrated himself back into the life of Superior, helping neighbors with odd jobs, attending church services, and treating everyone with courtesy and respect. Delilah heard reports from various townsfolk about Benjamin Irving's return, how he had made something of himself, how he had helped old Mrs. Crawford repair her fence without being asked, how he had bought supplies at the general store and paid in crisp bills without haggling over prices. She observed him from a distance, trying to reconcile her memories with the reality of the man he had become. He moved with more confidence now, carried himself with the assurance of someone who had fought for everything he had and won. But she also saw flashes of the boy she had loved in the way he smiled at children playing in the street, the way he paused to appreciate the sunset painting the desert mountains in shades of amber and gold. A week after his return, Delilah was helping her father close up the store for the evening when Benjamin appeared on the porch again, hat in hand. "I wondered if you might take a walk with me," he said, directing his words to Delilah but keeping a respectful eye on her father. "Just to talk, with your father's permission, of course. We could walk down Main Street where everyone can see us. Nothing improper." Delilah looked at her father, who studied Benjamin for a long moment before giving a curt nod. "Be back before full dark," he said to Delilah. She untied her apron and stepped out onto the porch, her heart beating faster as Benjamin offered his arm. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt sleeve. They walked in silence for a bit, nodding to neighbors who watched their progress with undisguised curiosity. Superior was a small town, and Benjamin Irving's return was the most interesting thing to happen in months. "Tell me about your ranch," Delilah said finally, breaking the silence. "You said it is in New Mexico territory." "Yes, in the northern part near the Colorado border. The land is beautiful, high country with ponderosa pines and meadows that stay green even in summer because of the mountain streams." Benjamin's voice took on a quality of pride mixed with affection. "The house is 2 stories, built from timber and stone. I made sure it had large windows to let in light, and a wide porch where you can sit and watch the sun rise over the mountains. There is a separate kitchen building to keep the heat away from the main house in summer, and a root cellar dug deep enough to keep food cold even in August." "You built all that yourself?" Delilah asked, genuinely impressed despite herself. "With help from hired hands and neighbors, yes." "The first year was the hardest. I worked for wages on other ranches, slept in bunkhouses, and saved every penny. The second year, I had enough to buy a small parcel of land and a few head of cattle. Every year after that, I expanded, bought more land when it became available, increased the herd. I did not spend money on anything that was not necessary. No drinking, no gambling, no luxuries. Everything went back into the ranch." "That must have been lonely," Delilah observed, and she meant it. She could picture him working alone, pushing himself relentlessly, denying himself even small pleasures in pursuit of his goal. "It was," Benjamin admitted. "There were times I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether I should just come back and try to convince you to take a chance on me despite having nothing. But then I would remember your father's words, remember that he was right about what you deserved, and I would push through another day." They had reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open desert, and by unspoken agreement, they turned to walk back. The sun was lowering toward the western mountains, painting everything in warm golden light. "My father should not have spoken to you that way," Delilah said quietly. "He had no right to send you away without even telling me about the conversation. But you should have told me, Benjamin. You should have trusted me with the truth instead of making that decision alone. You are right, Benjamin said, stopping to face her directly, his expression serious and open. "I was wrong to leave the way I did. I was proud and hurt and young enough to think I was doing something noble by disappearing to make my fortune. But it was not noble. It was selfish. I convinced myself I was protecting you from disappointment, but really I was protecting my own pride. I could not bear the thought of you seeing me fail or struggle, could not stand the idea of you having to defend your choice to be with me to your father and the rest of the town." The honesty in his words struck something deep inside Delilah. She had expected excuses, justifications, but instead he was simply acknowledging his mistakes without trying to minimize them. "I am not going to pretend those 5 years did not happen," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I cannot just forget the pain and uncertainty. You need to understand that even if I wanted to forgive you immediately, there is a part of me that is afraid that you will leave again, that something else will happen and you will decide I am better off without you and disappear." "I understand that fear," Benjamin said, and he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted before taking her hand gently in his. "I cannot erase the past, Delilah. I can only promise you that I will never leave like that again. If you give me another chance, if you decide you can trust me again, I swear to you I will spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice. And if you decide you cannot forgive me, that too much damage has been done, I will respect that decision and leave you in peace." Delilah looked down at their joined hands, at the calluses on his palm that spoke of hard work and sacrifice. She thought about the girl she had been 5 years ago, so certain of her love, so ready to build a life with this man. That girl was gone, replaced by someone more cautious, more guarded. But underneath all that protection, underneath all the walls she had built, she could feel the ember of her love for Benjamin still glowing, waiting to be fanned back into flame. "I need more time," she said finally, gently extracting her hand from his. "But I am willing to talk to you, to let you try to rebuild what was broken. I make no promises beyond that." Benjamin's face lit up with such hope that it nearly broke her resolve to move slowly. "That is more than I dared dream of," he said. "Thank you, Delilah. I will not waste this chance." They walked back to the store in more comfortable silence, and when they parted, Delilah felt something shifting inside her, some of the bitterness loosening its hold on her heart. Over the following weeks, Benjamin courted her with a determination and creativity that gradually wore down her defenses. He brought her flowers picked from the desert, surprisingly delicate blooms that thrived in the harsh climate. He came to the store and helped her father with heavy lifting without being asked, proving himself useful and reliable. He shared meals with her family, telling stories of his years away that were self-deprecating and honest, never trying to make himself sound more heroic or successful than the reality. He told her about the time his first cattle drive had gone disastrously wrong when a thunderstorm spooked the herd, and he spent 3 days rounding up scattered cattle, sleeping on the ground in soaking wet clothes, and wondering if he had made a terrible mistake in trying to become a rancher. He told her about the neighbor who had taken a chance on him, lending him money for his first land purchase when no bank would consider his application. He told her about the loneliness of those first winters, when the snow would pile so deep he could go weeks without seeing another human being, with nothing but his own thoughts and the memory of her face to keep him company. With each story, each honest admission of struggle and doubt, Delilah felt herself softening toward him. This was not the proud boy who had left without explanation. This was a man who had been humbled by hardship and made stronger by it, who had learned that pride was less important than honesty, that noble intentions were meaningless without considering the feelings of those you claim to love. One evening in early September, as the brutal Arizona heat finally began to ease, Benjamin asked if she would take a ride with him outside of town. Delilah hesitated, knowing that leaving the town proper would raise eyebrows and invite speculation, but something in his expression told her this was important. She agreed, ignoring her father's concerned look, and soon she was seated beside Benjamin on a small wagon he had borrowed, heading toward the creek where they used to meet when they were younger. The cottonwood trees were just beginning to show hints of autumn color, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Benjamin helped her down from the wagon and led her to a spot beneath the largest tree, where someone had recently cleared away the brush and laid out a blanket along with a basket. "I thought we could have a picnic," Benjamin said, suddenly looking nervous in a way that made him seem younger. "Like we used to do before I left. I know we cannot go back to that time, but I wanted to create a new memory here, one not tainted by my mistakes." Delilah settled onto the blanket, touched by the effort he had clearly put into this. The basket contained fresh bread, cheese, apples, and even a small jar of honey, luxuries that would have cost him a fair amount at the general store. They ate and talked as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Benjamin told her more about his ranch, describing it in such vivid detail that she could almost see the mountain meadows and hear the sound of the creek running through his property. He spoke about his plans for the future, how he wanted to improve the breeding stock, how he hoped to build a barn next summer that would be large enough to store hay for even the harshest winters. "I want you to see it," Benjamin said suddenly, his eyes intense as they met hers. "I want you to come to New Mexico and see what I built, see the home I made with you in mind for every decision. You do not have to give me an answer about anything. Just come and see it, and then decide if it is something you could imagine for yourself." Delilah's heart raced at the implication in his words, at the future he was offering her. "Benjamin, I cannot just travel to New Mexico territory with you unchaperoned. You know what people would say." "I know," he said quickly. "I thought about that. What if your father came with us?" "I would pay all the expenses, get us rooms in proper hotels along the way, everything completely respectable. Once we got to the ranch, you could stay with my nearest neighbors, a lovely family with a wife who would be happy to host you. You could see the property, meet the people in the area, get a real sense of what life there would be like." The fact that he had thought through all the practical details, that he was willing to include her father and ensure everything was proper, showed a maturity that the younger Benjamin had lacked. He was not asking her to run away with him on some romantic adventure. He was asking her to make an informed decision about her future. "Let me talk to my father," Delilah said finally. "I cannot make any promises, but I will consider it." Benjamin's face broke into a smile that reminded her so much of the boy she had fallen in love with that her breath caught. "That is all I ask," he said. To her surprise, Harold Sanders agreed to the trip after only a brief conversation with Benjamin about the arrangements. Her father had been watching Benjamin carefully over the past weeks, Delilah knew, evaluating his character and his intentions. Whatever Harold had seen must have satisfied him, because 2 weeks later they were loading supplies into a wagon for the journey to New Mexico territory. The trip took 8 days of travel through some of the most beautiful and harsh country Delilah had ever seen. They passed through high desert dotted with saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings, climbed into pine forests that smelled of resin and earth, and crossed meadows where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season. Benjamin proved himself an excellent guide, knowing where to find water and good camping spots, handling the wagon with practiced ease even over rough terrain. At night, they would make camp and Benjamin would build a fire while Delilah prepared simple meals from their supplies. Harold watched everything with sharp eyes, and Delilah noticed her father gradually relaxing around Benjamin, even beginning to ask him questions about ranching and the cattle business. The two men developed a cautious respect for each other during those long days of travel, bonding over shared practical concerns and a mutual love for the woman between them. When they finally arrived at Benjamin's ranch, Delilah was struck silent by the beauty of the place. He had not exaggerated in his descriptions. The house stood in a meadow surrounded by pine-covered mountains, with a clear creek running nearby. It was larger than she had expected, built solidly with a careful attention to detail that showed in every corner and joint. The porch wrapped around two sides of the house, and she could imagine sitting there in the evenings, watching the sun set over the western peaks. Benjamin's neighbors, the Morrison family, welcomed them warmly. Clara Morrison was a cheerful woman in her 30s with 3 young children, who immediately took to showing Delilah around their property and telling her all about life in this remote corner of New Mexico territory. Her husband, Thomas, was a quiet man who clearly respected Benjamin and spoke highly of him as a neighbor and friend. Over the next few days, Delilah explored the ranch with Benjamin as her guide while her father met with Thomas Morrison to discuss cattle breeding techniques. Benjamin showed her every aspect of the operation, from the sturdy barns to the fenced pastures where healthy cattle grazed. He introduced her to his ranch hands, a small crew of 3 men who spoke respectfully of their employer and the fair wages he paid. But it was the house that captivated Delilah most completely. Benjamin walked her through each room, and she could see how he had built it with a future family in mind. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs, far more than a single man would need. The kitchen was spacious and well-designed, with a good stove and plenty of storage. The main room downstairs had a massive stone fireplace and windows that let in streams of golden light. "I built the largest bedroom for us," Benjamin said quietly as they stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, and Delilah noticed he said us, not me. "I wanted it to face east so the morning sun would wake us gently. There is space for a cradle beside the bed for when we have children, and the room is large enough that it would not feel cramped even with furniture." The casual way he spoke about their future together, as if it was simply a matter of when rather than if, should have annoyed her. Instead, she found it touching, evidence of how much thought he had put into building not just a house, but a home meant for them. "Show me the rest of the property," she said, not ready yet to address the implications of standing in a bedroom he had designed for them to share. They spent the afternoon riding across his land, and Benjamin showed her his favorite spots. A high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors each spring, a grove of aspens that turned gold in autumn, a rocky outcropping that provided a view for miles in every direction. With each place he shared, Delilah could feel herself falling not just for him again, but for this life he had built, this beautiful wild place that he was offering to share with her. On their last evening before they were scheduled to start the journey back to Arizona, Benjamin asked her to walk with him to the creek. The night was clear and cool, and stars blazed overhead in numbers that seemed impossible. They sat on a flat rock beside the water, listening to it gurgle over smooth stones. "What do you think?" Benjamin asked finally, his voice quiet and nervous. "Could you be happy here?" Delilah looked around at the dark shapes of the mountains against the starlit sky, at the house glowing with lamplight in the distance, at the peaceful beauty of this place. She thought about what her life would be like if she returned to Arizona and never saw Benjamin again. She would help her father run the store, would perhaps eventually marry someone safe and practical, would build a comfortable if unexciting life. There would be nothing wrong with that choice, but it would always be shadowed by the question of what might have been. "I could be happy here," she admitted finally. "It is beautiful, and I can see how hard you have worked to build something solid and lasting. But Benjamin, I need to know that you will not make decisions for me anymore. If we are going to do this, if I am going to take this chance with you, I need to know that you see me as a partner, not someone to be protected from hard truths or difficult choices." "I understand," Benjamin said, and he reached out to take her hand, his grip warm and sure. "I learned the hard way that protecting someone from the truth is just another form of dishonesty. If you agree to marry me, if you choose to build a life here with me, I promise I will tell you everything. We will make decisions together, face hardships together, celebrate successes together. I want a true partnership, Delilah, not a marriage where I pretend to have all the answers." "Then ask me properly," Delilah said, her heart racing but her voice steady. Benjamin slid off the rock to kneel on the ground before her, pulling a small box from his pocket. When he opened it, she saw a ring with a simple gold band and a small diamond that caught the starlight. "Delilah Sanders, I have loved you since I was 17 years old and you smiled at me in church. I loved you when I left 5 years ago, even though I was too foolish to tell you the truth. I loved you every day I was gone, and I love you now with everything I am. Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on building a life with me here as my wife and my partner?" Tears streamed down Delilah's face, but they were not tears of sadness. She thought about everything that had happened, all the pain and growth and change they had both experienced. She thought about the boy who had left and the man who had returned. She thought about her own journey from heartbroken girl to strong woman, and how she had learned that forgiveness did not mean forgetting but rather choosing to move forward despite the past. "Yes," she said, and the word came out somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Yes, I will marry you." Benjamin surged up from his knees and pulled her into his arms, and finally, after 5 long years, Delilah let herself sink into his embrace. When he kissed her, it felt both familiar and new, a promise of things lost and found and yet to come. When they returned to the Morrison house that evening to share the news, Clara let out a delighted shriek and immediately began planning a celebration. Harold Sanders, when informed of his daughter's engagement, studied Benjamin for a long moment before extending his hand. "You take care of her," Harold said gruffly. "And if you ever think about leaving her behind again, even for what you think is a good reason, you come talk to me first. Understood?" "Understood, sir," Benjamin said, shaking his future father-in-law's hand firmly. "I will never make that mistake again." They were married 6 weeks later in Superior, Arizona, giving Delilah time to prepare and say proper goodbyes to the life she was leaving behind. The wedding was held in the small church where they had first met all those years ago, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Delilah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that her mother had worn at her own wedding, altered to fit her taller frame. Benjamin wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, tugging at his collar until Delilah laughingly told him to stop fidgeting. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed her with such tenderness and joy that Delilah felt her last reservations melt away. This was right. This was worth the risk. The journey back to New Mexico, as husband and wife, was completely different from their first trip. Harold had decided to stay in Arizona, satisfied now that his daughter was in good hands, and so Benjamin and Delilah traveled alone, camping under the stars and talking late into the night about their hopes and dreams for the future. Benjamin was attentive and patient, and when they reached a small town with a proper hotel, he took a room for their wedding night, wanting their first time together as a married couple to be special rather than huddled in a bedroll on the hard ground. He was gentle with her, taking his time despite Delilah's nervous eagerness, showing her with his body what he had already told her with words, that she was precious to him, that he would cherish and protect her, that this partnership they were building was based on mutual love and respect. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow hotel bed, Delilah felt a peace she had not experienced in years. She was exactly where she was meant to be. When they arrived at the ranch that would now be her home, Delilah threw herself into making it truly theirs. She added curtains to the windows and rugs to the floors, planted a garden near the kitchen building, and filled the house with small touches that made it feel welcoming. Clara Morrison became a dear friend, visiting often and teaching Delilah the particular skills needed for ranch life, from preserving food for the long winters to treating minor livestock ailments. Benjamin was a better husband than Delilah had even dared hope. He consulted her on ranch decisions, valued her input, and never made her feel like her thoughts were less important because she was still learning about ranching. When she suggested they try raising chickens for eggs and meat, he built her a sturdy coop. When she expressed interest in learning to ride better, he spent hours patiently teaching her until she could ride alongside him when he checked on the herd. Their first winter together was hard, with deep snows that isolated them for weeks at a time, but Delilah found she loved the cozy intimacy of being snowed in with her husband. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, and Benjamin would read aloud from books while she knitted or mended clothes. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and moods, building the deep friendship that would sustain their marriage through whatever challenges life might bring. By spring, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Benjamin on a morning in April when the meadow outside their window was carpeted with wildflowers, and the air smelled of pine and possibility. He had been getting ready to ride out to check on the herd when she caught his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply, and the look of wonder and joy that crossed his face made her fall in love with him all over again. "Truly?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You are certain as I can be." "Clara says all the signs are there, and she has been through it 3 times herself, so I trust her judgment." Benjamin pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt his shoulders shaking with silent tears. When he finally released her enough to look at her face, his eyes were wet but smiling. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for giving me this chance, for forgiving me, for building this life with me. I promise I will be the best father I can be to our child." "I know you will," Delilah said, and she meant it with her whole heart. Their son was born in December during a snowstorm that trapped the midwife at their ranch for 3 days. Benjamin stayed by Delilah's side through the long hours of labor, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths, never flinching even when she squeezed his fingers hard enough to leave bruises. When the baby finally arrived, a squalling, red-faced boy with a full head of dark hair, Benjamin wept openly as he held his son for the first time. They named him James Harold Irving, after Benjamin's grandfather and Delilah's father, and sent word to Arizona as soon as the snows cleared enough for travel. Harold made the journey to meet his grandson that spring, and Delilah was touched to see her gruff father turn soft and gentle as he held the baby. "You did well for yourself," Harold admitted to Benjamin one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I was wrong to judge you so harshly when you were younger. You have built a good life here, and you make my daughter happy. That is all a father can really ask for." I understand why you said what you did back then, Benjamin replied. You were protecting your daughter, and you were right that I had nothing to offer her at the time. I am grateful you gave me the chance to prove myself when I came back. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by both joys and the inevitable hardships of ranching life. They lost cattle to harsh winters and drought, faced down rustlers on 2 occasions, and weathered economic downturns that made every penny count. But they also celebrated successes, expanding the ranch gradually as they could afford it, improving their breeding stock, and building a reputation for quality cattle that commanded good prices. Delilah had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah who had her mother's green eyes and determination, born when James was 3, and another son they named Thomas after their good friend and neighbor, born 2 years after that. The house that had seemed so large when Delilah first saw it now rang with the noise and chaos of 3 children, and she could not imagine it any other way. Benjamin proved himself to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. He taught James to ride and to rope, instilling in his son a love for the land and the work of ranching. He was patient with Sarah's endless questions, explaining how everything worked from the windmill that pumped water to the patterns of the seasons. And he bounced baby Thomas on his knee while telling stories of his own childhood, passing down family history to the next generation. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Delilah back to the spot by the creek where he had proposed. They sat on the same flat rock, and he pulled out a letter from his pocket. I told you once that I wrote you letters I never sent while I was gone, he said. I kept them all, dozens of them, chronicling every step of my journey to become worthy of you. I want to give them to you now, not because I think you need to read them, but because they are part of our story. They show where I was and what I was thinking during those years we were apart. Delilah took the bundle of letters, yellowed and worn from being carried and reread. Thank you for keeping them, she said. I will read them, not because I doubt you, but because I want to understand all of it, the full story of how we got here. She read them over the following weeks, late at night when the children were asleep and Benjamin was dozing beside her. The letters chronicled his journey in painful detail, the loneliness and doubt, the backbreaking work and small victories. In them, she saw the boy she had loved growing into the man she had married, saw him wrestling with his decision to leave, questioning it repeatedly, but always coming back to his determination to become someone worthy of her love. Some of the letters made her cry, particularly the ones written during his first winter alone, when he admitted to questioning whether she would wait for him, whether he would ever have the courage to return and face what he had done. Others made her smile, like the one where he described successfully buying his first parcel of land and imagining her reaction when he finally brought her to see it. When she finished the last letter, dated just 2 weeks before he had ridden back into Superior, Delilah placed them carefully in a box to save. Someday, when their children were older, she might share these letters with them, evidence that good things sometimes required sacrifice and patience, that love worth having was worth fighting for even when the path was unclear. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growing up of their children. James developed into a serious, hard-working young man who clearly would follow in his father's footsteps as a rancher. Sarah surprised everyone with her talent for horses, training them with a gentle persistence that had even the most difficult animals responding to her. Thomas was the wildest of the 3, always getting into mischief, but with a laugh that could charm his way out of most trouble. When Delilah was 33 and Benjamin 35, Harold Sanders passed away peacefully in his sleep back in Arizona. They made the sad journey back to Superior for the funeral, bringing all three children to say goodbye to their grandfather. As Delilah stood over her father's grave, Benjamin's steady presence beside her, she remembered how her father had tried to protect her from hardship by refusing Benjamin's suit all those years ago. She thought he would be pleased now to see how wrong he had been, to see the strong family they had built and the happiness they had found. They stayed in Superior for 2 weeks after the funeral, settling Harold's affairs and selling the general store. Delilah was surprised by how little sadness she felt at leaving. This had been her home once, but it was not anymore. Her home was in New Mexico with Benjamin and their children, in the house he had built with her in mind, on the land they worked together. Back at the ranch, life continued with its mix of challenges and joys. They hosted dances in their barn for neighbors scattered across the territory, building community in that isolated place. They survived droughts and celebrated good years. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they had learned to talk through their disagreements, to compromise and forgive, to remember that they were partners facing the world together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Delilah by taking her on a trip back to the spot where they used to meet by the creek in Arizona. He had arranged for Clara Morrison to watch the children for a week, and they made the journey together, just the two of them as they had been on their honeymoon. Standing beneath the cottonwood trees where it had all begun, Benjamin took both of her hands in his and looked into her eyes with the same intensity he had shown when he proposed. 10 years ago, you took a chance on me despite everything I had done wrong, he said. You forgave me when I did not deserve it, trusted me when I had broken that trust, and built a life with me that exceeds my wildest dreams. I want you to know that not a single day has passed when I have taken that for granted. I love you more now than I did when we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for being my wife, my partner, and the mother of my children. Thank you for making me want to be worthy of your love. Delilah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. You were always worthy, she said. You just had to believe it yourself. I am grateful for every day we have together, for the life we have built, for the family we have created. I love you, Benjamin Irving, and I always will. They kissed beneath the cottonwood trees where their story had begun so many years ago. Two people who had found their way back to each other, despite mistakes and time and distance. It was not the easiest path they could have taken, but it had led them to something real and lasting. The years continued to flow by, bringing new grandchildren as James married a rancher's daughter from over the mountains and started a family of his own. Sarah eventually married a horse trader who appreciated her skills and supported her unconventional passion for training animals. Thomas took longer to settle down, spending years wandering and trying different ventures before finally returning to the ranch and asking to become a full partner in the family business. Benjamin and Delilah grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and long years. But their love only deepened with time, rooted in mutual respect and shared history, in the knowledge that they had chosen each other every day for decades. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by their grown children and a house full of grandchildren, Benjamin stood to make a toast. 30 years ago, I rode back into Superior convinced I had ruined the best thing in my life by leaving, he said, his voice still strong despite his 60 years. I had spent 5 years trying to become worthy of the woman I loved, building a ranch and a future, only to discover that she had been worthy of my honesty all along. I should have trusted her with the truth, instead of making decisions for her. But Delilah, in her grace and wisdom, gave me another chance. She agreed to take a risk on a man who had already failed her once, and in doing so, she gave me the greatest gift of my life." He turned to look at Delilah, his eyes still holding the same love and admiration they had shown on their wedding day. "These 30 years have been the best of my life. Every success has been sweeter because I shared it with you. Every hardship has been bearable because you faced it beside me. You have made me a better man, a better father, and I thank God every day that you said yes when I knelt by that creek and asked you to marry me." Delilah rose to stand beside her husband, taking his hand as she addressed their assembled family. "When Benjamin left all those years ago, I thought my life was over, that I would never recover from that heartbreak. But that pain taught me strength I did not know I had. And when he returned, I was able to make a choice based not on the naive dreams of a girl, but on the realistic assessment of a woman who knew her own worth. Benjamin did not need to become worthy of my love. He needed to learn to communicate honestly and to value partnership over pride. And once he did that, we were able to build something remarkable together." She looked around at their children and grandchildren, at the family they had created through love and patience and hard work. "I want all of you to remember that love alone is not enough for a lasting marriage. You also need honesty, respect, forgiveness, and the willingness to choose each other every single day, even when it is hard. Your father and I have had our struggles, but we never stopped choosing each other, and that has made all the difference." The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared among generations. As Delilah watched her grandchildren playing and her children laughing with their spouses, she felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what Benjamin had been building when he spent those 5 years away. Not just a ranch or a house, but the foundation for a family that would continue long after they were gone. As they prepared for bed that night, Benjamin helped Delilah remove the pins from her hair, something he had done nearly every night for 30 years. It was a small, intimate ritual that had become precious to them both, a quiet moment of connection at the end of each day. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked softly. "Leaving Arizona, the life you could have had if you had married someone else?" Delilah met his eyes in the mirror and smiled. "Never, not for a single moment. This life, this family, this partnership we have built, it is everything I ever wanted even when I did not know to want it. You made mistakes, yes, but you learned from them. And together we have created something beautiful." She turned to face him directly, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You spent 5 years trying to become worthy of my love, but what you really needed to do was believe that you already were. I fell in love with you when you had nothing, Benjamin. I would have chosen you then, just as I choose you now. The ranch, the house, the success, those are wonderful, but they were never what made you worthy. Your heart did that. Your capacity for love and growth and change, that is what makes you the man I want to spend my life with." Benjamin pulled her close, and they stood there in the lamplight, holding each other as they had done thousands of times before. "I am the luckiest man alive," he whispered into her hair. "We are both lucky," Delilah corrected gently. "Lucky that we found each other. Lucky that we got a second chance. Lucky that we were both willing to do the work to make this marriage thrive." They lived out their remaining years on the ranch they had built together, watching their grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. Benjamin remained active in ranching well into his 70s, refusing to fully retire even when James gently suggested he might want to slow down. Delilah maintained her garden and continued to be the heart of their extended family, hosting gatherings and keeping everyone connected. When Benjamin finally passed away at 78, with Delilah holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed, his last words were a whisper of thanks for the life they had shared. Delilah grieved him deeply but not desperately. secure in the knowledge that they had used their time together well, that they had built something lasting, that their love had been real and true and worth every struggle. She lived 3 more years after Benjamin's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the early days on the ranch and of the young man who had ridden away to make his fortune, so he could be worthy of her love. She made sure the letters Benjamin had written during those 5 years apart were preserved, along with her own journals documenting their life together, so that future generations would know their story. On a warm spring evening, surrounded by wildflowers and with the mountains glowing in the sunset light, Delilah passed peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside Benjamin on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their long lives. But their legacy lived on in the family that continued to work the land they had built together, in the values of honesty and partnership they had instilled in their children, and in the love story that became family legend, told and retold with pride. The tale of a young man who left to become worthy, and a young woman who taught him that worthiness came from within, of 5 years apart that made their eventual reunion even sweeter, of a love that had weathered mistakes and distance and time to become something enduring. The ranch itself continued to thrive under the care of their descendants, expanding and modernizing while still maintaining the core principles Benjamin and Delilah had established. The house Benjamin had built remained the family home, passed down through generations, its walls holding the echoes of countless conversations and celebrations, its rooms filled with the love and laughter of children who carried on their legacy. In the town that grew up nearby over the decades, people still spoke of Benjamin and Delilah Irving, of the man who had worked for 5 years to prove himself and the woman who had been wise enough to give him a second chance. Their story became the standard by which other marriages were measured, proof that true love combined with honest communication and mutual respect could overcome any obstacle. On the hill where they were buried, wildflowers continued to bloom each spring, covering their graves in a riot of color that would have pleased Delilah. And on quiet evenings, when the wind rustled through the pine trees and the creek murmured its eternal song, it was easy to imagine them there still, 2 souls who had found their way back to each other and built something beautiful that would last long beyond their years. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the ranch today, living in the house Benjamin built with windows facing east to catch the morning sun, raising cattle on the land he first purchased over 140 years ago. They know the story of their ancestors, of the 5 years apart and the 30 years together, of the mistakes made and the forgiveness granted, of the love that proved strong enough to survive and thrive despite every challenge. And sometimes, when they face their own difficulties in love or life, they remember Benjamin and Delilah, remember that worthiness is not about grand gestures or material success, but about showing up honestly, about choosing your partner every day, about building something together that is greater than either person alone could achieve. They remember that true love requires not just passion but patience, not just romance but respect, not just dreams but the daily work of making those dreams reality. The story of Benjamin Irving, who spent 5 years becoming worthy, and Delilah Sanders, who taught him he already was, lives on as more than just family history. It serves as a reminder that the most meaningful journeys are not always straightforward, that the greatest loves can survive even serious mistakes, and that sometimes the path to happiness requires both the courage to change and the wisdom to forgive. Their legacy is not just the successful ranch or the large family, but the example they set of what a true partnership can accomplish when two people commit to growing together, communicating honestly, and choosing love every single day, through all the joys and challenges life brings.